Hey everyone, good morning / good afternoon, wherever you all are. It's nice to see you all. Thank you to everyone that's here live with us, and thank you to everyone who is watching this recording. Hey to Anders and hey to Edward. I know, week 4 already. Me and Matt cannot believe it. I can't believe how quickly these weeks are going. After today, we have 2 more weeks, Matt. Can you believe it?
I know, what will we do?
I know, what will we do on a Wednesday afternoon now?
We'll have to do another one.
I think we might have to. Okay, cool. So really quickly, I'm just going to do my little mini presentation. You know how I like to do these things. And then we're going to get right into it because we have, as always, so much amazing stuff we want to show you guys today. So to anyone who is new here, welcome, thanks, hi, thanks for being here. The idea of this kind of hands-on beginners workshop is to get you guys comfortable in Cinema 4D in just 6 weeks. So we're going through a whole bunch of kind of Cinema 4D basics from scratch, a load of different topics. And these are the topics that we've been doing. So far, we've had 3 weeks already. We've done our getting started, we've done some modeling, and we've done some lighting and materials. And we do actually record these, and these are on an unlisted playlist on YouTube. So if anyone wants that playlist, the link to that playlist, just let us know and we can ping it in the chat. We can send it to you privately. Yeah, we're more than happy to share that with you guys. That's not a problem. And yeah, week 4, animation and dynamics. Yeah, can't believe we're in week 4, mad. And then yeah, next week we've got all things to do with MoGraph, which is going to be so much fun. Like, I'm really excited for that one. And then we're going to kind of like cap it all off with a load of stuff about rendering and a load of stuff about Redshift too, because, you know, we want to do those things as well. So animation dynamics. We've got a couple of like session objectives for today, just so you guys have an idea of the sort of stuff we're going to be going through. But trust me, this is like the tip of the iceberg of the stuff that we're going to be showing today. I just didn't want to list like a million things on this page. So the main idea is we're going to learn how to animate inside of Cinema 4D.
We can't see your screen, or I can't see your screen.
Oh no. Let me, oh no, what a shame. But it's all good. Right, here we go. Show my screen. Better?
Yay!
Oh, okay. The first 3 slides weren't that important anyway.
Oh no!
No, it's fine. They've seen them, you've seen them all before. Right, okay, cool. So I'm gonna start again on this bit. So yeah, the idea is we're gonna learn how to animate inside of Cinema 4D. We're gonna know how to set up keyframes and what kind of keyframing is. We have like an auto way and a manual way, so loads of different types of keyframing. And then we're gonna take a look at F-curves and how and where we can adjust these F-curves and what exactly kind of like the Cinema 4D timeline is and how we can use that. We're then going to take a little look at some simple camera animation techniques, as well as like some other tags inside of Cinema 4D. So we had a little look, I think it was last week, at some tags. And so we've got like, you know, like target tags, align to spline. Those are sort of like the ones we're going to have a little look at today with regards to camera animating. And then we're going to take a look at dynamics inside of Cinema 4D. So animation and dynamics are kind of, they're 2 separate topics. But when me and Matt were looking at how we could break this down, we thought those 2, first of all, were really interesting things to show you guys. And so we thought they were also 2 that go really nicely together. And then next week we'll be doing MoGraph, which is kind of like following along a little bit with like animation. And then, as you know, we like to do a bit of like a practical in the second half. And so we're going to create our own dynamic animation. And the idea will be we're also going to light it. We're going to texture it after all the stuff that we learned last week. And then we're going to look at how we can render it out, kind of like real like simple like render settings, because that will be a lot of like week 6. And then hopefully it'll be something that you guys can have and post on, I don't know, like Instagram or any of your socials, Twitter, Facebook, whatever you guys use. We thought that would be a nice little a treat for you guys to have to post, or just keep saved somewhere on your computer. So, Matt, are you ready to get into it and get started?
I am. Shall I steal the screen?
Yes. And
I'm going to
also
steal it
hi
this
to
time rather
everyone
than
as
have it
well.
throwing at me.
Hi to everyone
Sorry?
who's saying hello in the chat. And don't forget, ask us questions. You know, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So, you know, drop your messages in there and I'll just interrupt Matt as he goes. He really doesn't mind.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Right. Okay, so animation in Cinema 4D. Animation through a variety of 3D programs and a lot of other animationable programs are very similar, to be perfectly honest. So the principle is pretty much the same in all of the others. But firstly, let's create an object for us to animate. So I'm going to create a cube. Boom, there it is. And I'm going to start with a very simple way of animating. I'm going to take my cube, I'm going to move it all the way over there, and then I'm going to press this keyframe button here, record active objects. Boom. I press that once. I now have a little white keyframe in my timeline preview thing here. That lets me know that that has been recorded. And then I'm going to move my time slider all the way to the end of my animation. I'm going to move my cube to where I want it to be, and then I'm going to press manual record again. Now, you'll notice that if I hover over this little button, it says record active objects. So this will only record the objects that I have selected, and it only records the position, scale, and rotation by default of these objects. Okay, so keyframes, for those people who don't know or haven't yet to sort of figure them out, are like sort of appointments in a diary. They say you will be here at this time, and then you will be here at this time. Thankfully, with the joys of computer animation and digital animation, I don't have to do all of the bits in between. Going back to 2D animation and things, you would have the people who did the keyframes, and they would be the main animators, like, for example, Walt Disney. I'm not sure he actually did any animation, but those main paid animators did the keyframes, like the main positions of animation. The bits, the frames in between, were then done by the tweeners, the people who did the frames in between, the lesser paid and junior animators. Thankfully, my little computer is the junior animator here, and I am the senior animator getting paid for having a cube move from one end of screen to the other. And as you can see, I've got my two keyframes on my timeline, and I have my blue animation track. These little dots represent each individual frame. So you can see that there's more at one end and the other, but they space out in the middle. And if I press play, this is the result. Thank you very much for joining us. That's all for me this week. No, not really. But there you go. You can see you've got the really simple animation of a cube moving from left to right. It starts slowly, it speeds up, and then it slows back down again. This is something called easing in and easing out, which we will have a look at a little bit later. So that is a simple manual keyframe. Okay, let's have a look at another one. Let's create a cube, and I'm going to move my cube over there. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn on auto keying, which is this second red record button here. The moment I press that, I get the big red outline that says everything that you do here will be recorded, sort of. That's the way it used to work. If I move my cube, you can see that it isn't recording any animations. There was a big change a couple of years ago with one of our versions that stopped this recording absolutely everything that you did. And you have to give it a starting keyframe, very much like After Effects, to say, record this particular information. So I'm going to go to my coordinates tab, and I'm just going to quickly click and hold with my left mouse button and paint over those three, the position, P, X, Y, and Z. This will now tell Cinema, right, I've got some animation tracks of these, you can tell because I've got the red bits, and that says, okay, what do I want to change? What will I record? All of these depending on where you put them. So now if I go to the end of my animation, like I did before, you can see that my little red animation dots have changed into red rings. This means there is an animation track here, there is a keyframe somewhere, your timeline scrubber is currently not on it. Okay, not a problem. It's just a warning. And now what I'll do, I'll move my cube all the way over there. And I'll let go, and ping, you can see they've become 3 red dots without me having to press the record button because it's been done via the auto keyframe. If I go halfway through my animation and I move my cube up, can you see that in the attributes manager on the right hand side, I've got the 2 red rings under X and Z, and a yellow, amber, orange, not really quite sure what color that's ever supposed to be, gold, ring that is a warning that says, you have edited this, or in the middle of editing this, because I still haven't actually let go of my mouse yet. This is the thing that you are currently changing, and this is a warning. If I let go, bing, you can see now I've got the 3 red dots again, and my animation track has changed. And maybe I want it to move over there. Boom. What if I want it to change size? No dice. Why? Because I haven't keyframed that information anywhere, but I can do. So let me just undo that, and now my cube is the same size. And you can see if I scrub my way through my animation, it moves from one side to another, and it goes up and it goes to the left a bit. Now let's say, okay, I want to keyframe its size, and I'm only going to change its size in Y. So I'll only press the red dot for that, and then at the end of my animation, I'll squidge that down, and now that auto records, and I now have a cube that changes size. So lots of stuff in Cinema 4D is animatable. Basically, anything with one of these animation dots, which when you actually start to look through Cinema 4D, you will discover is about 98% of the things in Cinema 4D you can keyframe, including, if I want to, materials. So with my material selected, I'm going to put a little record keyframe on my color, and at the end of the animation, I'm going to make it red. And now watch, my cube changes color. So there are a whole host of different things that you can keyframe and use and move around to bring things in Cinema 4D to life. I'm going to pause there to see if we've got any questions.
We actually have a couple that's
Ooh.
not necessarily relating to this, but I thought could still be handy to answer now, or whether you, or let me know if you're going to get to it later, and then maybe.
Okay.
So someone's asked, are you able to place 3 objects on one path and get them to start in different places?
Yes, we will get to that later.
Align to spline.
Aye.
Yeah, so we will definitely get to that in a little bit. Yeah, and the second one also relates to that, so I'll ask.
Oh, okay.
When we get to that.
Okay, right. So let's move on then. Let's have a look at what this actually creates. And I'm going to, I don't know, I did that. I'm going to do file and new, and I'm going to create another cube. Hooray! I like cubes. Cubes are fun. Cubes are exciting. Cubes are easy. So with my 3 objects selected, boom, 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 I'm moving to the left-hand side, and then I'm going to press the record button, pop, which moves and it keeps throwing me. And I'm going to move those over there, and I'm going to click record. Pop. So now I have 3 record buttons, 3 things that are recorded. And I have 3 cubes that move from left to right. You can see that I had all 3 of them at the same time. That's a really useful thing to be able to do. Let's create another cube. Just want to show you something. This cube is not animated, as you can tell, because I've just made it. My keyframes here do not show, because this little timeline preview only shows you the keyframes of what you have selected. So if I hold that cube, you can see that one, and those keyframes are there, that one and that one. But if I select my third one, my keyframes disappear. This is only a preview of your animation keyframes. So if you want to have a look at more in-depth keyframes, then there are a couple of things you can do. We have a timeline, which you can get through window and timeline, or, which I now just can't, there we go, timeline, dope sheet, or F-curve, which we shall come to. Or if you want to have a look at other options, you can go to the top right-hand corner and change the startup layout to animate. And your screen will refresh. And what that does, that gives you a much bigger timeline down the bottom that allows you to see in more detail the keyframes that I have selected. And here they are, so they're the same object, but this time I can see all of the objects that are animated. I don't even have to have them selected. So I can click through them, and you can see that if I've got little plus signs on them, so I can open them up, and you can see I've got the position, scale, and rotation for all of them. I've got the position for X, Y, and Z. I've got the scale for X, Y, and Z. I've got the rotation for X, Y, and Z for all 3 of my cubes. Now that was because I pressed the record button, and that records position, scale, and rotation for all 3 of them at the same time, even if I've only actually changed one attribute across the entire thing. So yes, I could have just keyframed each one of them individually for the whichever the x-axis, which is what I've moved them on, but I wanted to show you that what you can do if there's stuff that you don't need, I can just select all of those, press delete, press delete. Let's do the same for scale on those 2 and scale on those 2. And actually, if we open these up, I've even got access to the F curves if somewhat small. You can see that the only keyframe, the only attribute that actually changes is my X position. So I will delete the Y positions as well from both of these. And that just gives me a little bit of a cleaner use. I've got a keyframe here that is my keyframe for position, and I've only got position in there, so I can minimize even those now. And it gives you a parent keyframe. So the cube and position are actually the same keyframe, and that gives you an idea. The summary keyframe lets you know from a very quick look that there is a keyframe here somewhere in your animation on an object. Let's, for example, select my cube 2 keyframe and just move it over here. You can see that its parent keyframe or parent marker moves as well, as does a summary. So it just lets you know that I've got a keyframe in there somewhere. You can drag and draw a box over all of the keyframes and then use the orange slider to move keyframes all in one go. You can even select all of your keyframes like this and then use the little, I'm not quite sure what to describe them as, the little orange bits above to squidge or move entire sets of keyframes all in one go. So that's a really useful aspect of the main timeline that could be very tricky to do on here. You can select them and move them, like you can see that I can actually edit it that way, but the hitbox for it is so tiny that it's probably much easier to use your animation timeline dope sheet mode here. Okay, so what I have is 3 cubes that move from the left hand side to the right hand side. They start on frame 0, they all finish on frame 90. Now we have the ability of changing how it gets there. It can start at the same frame and it will end at the same frame, but its journey can be different depending on what we do with something called the interpolation. And that is the movement, the journey, the space, the speed that it moves between one keyframe and another. We had a quick look at these a second ago, which was this curve. This is known as an F curve. In Cinema 4D, it's known as an F curve. It's generally short for function curve, which is also known in other things. It's also called curves. It's also called graphs. Most 3D or animation programs refer to, it's a different name for exactly the same thing. It is the interpolation between one frame and another. We can see this slightly easier with the dope sheet with the F curve mode of our timeline. So in our timeline, over the left-hand side, we've got dope sheet mode, which is a picture of a key in it, and then we have an F curve, which is like an F and a little pulse. If I select that, I have my F curve mode, and now I can select my objects to see my F curve. I'm going to select all 3 of them, and then I'm going to press this, which is a picture of like a heartbeat in a black frame, which frames my keyframes and frames the F curve so that I can see it all in my screen. You can move around this timeline with these 2 very similar looking icons, which is by left clicking and moving around that way, or left clicking and doing that. Moving your mouse up and down or left and right will allow you to expand or contract your keyframes to the tiniest possible amount, and then I will press the frame all button again to see my keyframes. Now, with all 3 of these selected, it means that I've actually got access to all 3 of these F curves at once. So I can edit all of these in one go. But I don't want to do that. I want to change the way these work. So I'm just going to make sure I've got one selected. Now, question. If I wanted this to be a constant speed from beginning to end so that it doesn't start slowly, speed up and slow down, there is a way to do that. I could spend quite a while faffing with this to try and make it a straight line, because that's what your F-curve interpolation would need to be. Or I have, thankfully, this linear F-curve interpolation mode where I press the button and it instantly gives me a straight line. So now if I press play, you can see it looks very weird because it looks like it's starting earlier, but it's not. It starts at frame 0 and it still finishes at frame 90. It just does a constant speed rather than jumping from one to the other. Let's have a look at another cube. So let's change this one. What if I wanted this to be at a frame and then be at the next one, so that there's no kind of tweening at all? I can use this, which is my step keyframe, step interpolation. So let's press that button and you'll see that very quickly it'll just pop, because my animation is only 1 frame long. It will go pop and then it will appear. So let's just make life easy for a bit. Let's go for the F curves, and I'm going to select all of my F keyframes, and I'm just going to bring it back to 60. So they still start at the same frame and they still finish at the same frame, but there's just 1 more second so that you can see that one pop. And you can see the 3 different types of F curve that I now have. I've got the linear line, I've got the step line, and I have my spline interpolation. The spline interpolation is exactly that. It is a line that you can adjust. So it's like a path. So this one, it can start slowly and go whoop. So you can see it's the middle one I'm playing with at the moment here. So that's cube. You can see it starts slowly and it gets faster, but it does still start and get there at the same time. You do have the ability of actually overreaching these sometimes, but we have actually now flattened that out, which is much nicer in the latest version, so that you can't go back on yourself. There was a point where it would go crazy with the F curves, but I can play with these F curves to my heart's content. So I can start this one fast and then slow it down, which is what we now have there. So that's very quickly how to look at F curves and change the interpolation. And it's the difference in interpolation that really makes animations come to life. If you animate everything and just do it standard curves, everything starts slowly and slows down, and that's fine. It's technically a principle of animation, but how it gets there in between and faster movements, sharper movements and things like that can really emphasize different parts of animation. So it's really worth bearing in mind. Now, a practical example of that, for those of you wishing to know, is a very simple animation exercise, which is the bouncy ball. So I'm going to create myself a sphere, and I'm going to move my sphere up. And then I'm going to, let's do it the proper way. So let's record that and turn on auto keyframing, and then I'm going to put that at 30, and I'm going to put this down at there. I actually need to make sure that that's at 100. The reason I know that is because my sphere is a 100 radius sphere, so the bottom of the sphere would be, to make the bottom of the sphere at 0, the axis of my sphere needs to be at 100 above y. You can also, I could continue to do that over and over again, or I can cheat. I mean, be efficient, be efficient. Select all of your keyframes like this, and I can hold down Control on my keyboard, it doesn't matter whether it's PC or Mac, and I'm going to move those along till I get to frames 60 and 90. Now I have a sphere that starts down and goes up, goes down, goes up, and I'm just going to squidge this a bit because I'm going to add an extra 30 frames to my animation, which can be done up here. So here I have 90, 90 and 0. 0 and 90 either side is my preview range. That lets me know where I can see my preview range. Sorry, 0 is the beginning end frame. I've completely mussed that up. 0 is the beginning frame, 90 is the end frame. You can see that these is where my preview range starts and finishes, and the top number is where my time slider is. If I want my animation to be longer, I can make that 120, and my animation is now 120 frames long. The band at the bottom auto expands, and I can now select my first frame, and I'm going to control drag that to the other end again, and that means that it now loops. So let's press play, and whee! It'll hit hypnotic. All very well and good. I have a sphere that goes up and down, but it doesn't look like it bounces. The reason for that is because of its automatic ease in and ease out, which means that it slows down as it gets to the ground, as it kind of goes, no, please don't hurt me. So what we can do, we can have a look at the F-curve for this object, and we can change it. This shows that it slows down, because basically this is a this is a time something graph. In this instance, it's height. It is a value from 0 to something, depending on how high you want to go, for the y-axis. So as a graph, you can see we've got it starts at just above 600, and then it goes all the way down, and when it gets to frame 30, it is at 100. And these are its positioned at each frame, subframe, and whatever, to show that curvature. So for all of those people who remember doing graphs in maths, then this is what it's for. This shows you the movement of this. But we can control this graph using these lovely little handles. So if I do this, I can change the way my interpolation works. But I want to manipulate these differently. So I'm going to hold down Shift on my keyboard, and I'm going to left click, and I can edit these individually, so that now if I press play, you can see that it starts slowly and then it looks like it hits the ground. The one that I haven't done, bounce, ooh, hovery, and then ooh, bounce, and then hovery. And I can cheat, I can do that again, or of course, because I've already got the keyframes, the interpolation is part of those keyframes, I can control and drag this, and I can overwrite them, and now I have a bouncy ball animation. Right, another good place to stop, methinks. Any questions?
Yes, I was actually about to say we've got a couple in. Okay, so first one here. Is there an easy way to export an animated OBJ sequence from Cinema 4D?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I believe there is a Cineversity plugin that allows you to do it. So anybody with a subscription has access to the CV toolbox, and I believe you can do an animated OBJ. I actually think you can now. So let's do file, export, brain, wavefront, OBJ, animation. Yeah, you should be able to do it actually straight from Cinema. Sorry. You didn't used to be able to, but I think now you can.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. Cool. Thanks. Can we animate individual points, faces, or edges?
Yes, you can. There are a couple of different ways of doing it. There's an old school. I've got to try and remember how to do that. There is an exceptionally old school way, which is called point level animation, which doesn't give you an awful lot of control, and that is actually what, I'm not sure this will even do it anymore. There is an easier way. So if I did that and pressed control, and if I do that and do that, I'm actually not even sure if that's going to work anymore. No, I thought it used to do point level control, but I'm not sure. Oh, it's because I've not turned it on, that's why. So this is one way. Let's try that again. Keyframe over there, keyframe over there. Yeah, that's one way. It's a little bit tricky. So if I'm honest, I really wouldn't recommend it. There is another way. Oh, didn't mean to do that either. Which is using tags and something called under the rigging tag, it is a pose morph tag. What this does, this allows you to record point level animation data inside a tag, and then it's much easier to work with. So looking at my tag, it says, what do I want to work with? And I'm going to choose points, boom. And now I have a base pose, which is my sphere, and I have a pose 0. So let's just select some points, scale them out, go to my pose. I can add another pose. That then reverts to the base pose. Let's select a bottom rung and do the same thing. And then I go back to my tag and animate, and now I have these two sliders. And these two sliders allow me to control the point level animation with much easier use. And if I want to go back, I can always go back and edit. I can select that, and then I can change it depending on what I want to do. So that's how I would do any form of point level animation.
Cool. Yeah, super handy trick, that pose morph tag, isn't it?
Yep, saves a lot of bacons.
Definitely. Okay, cool. Let's have a quick look. There's a couple more. So I think this relates to inside the dope sheet. What do the numbers on the left stand for? Anders has always wondered. And I think, yeah, it was when you were showing, is it the F curves? And
Yeah,
sure, that's when it came in.
This is going to be really, really great description. They refer to something. So the numbers along the top refer to the time. The numbers on the left refer to whatever value it is that you are relating to. So if you are using the X position, that will relate to its height or its movement along the x-axis, so anywhere between 0 and something depending on the movement. It could be a hue or saturation value between 0 and 100. It could be a brightness intensity data between 0 and whatever number you want to choose. So it is quite literally the something that you are intending on animating. Because everything in Cinema 4D is basically a number value, it is that number value on the left hand side.
Cool, thanks.
Sorry?
Does Cinema 4D have a frame rate of 25? Can a project have alternative frame rates?
Yes. If I look at my project settings by going to Command D, I think Control D works the same thing on a PC. You can choose your FPS. So at the moment, this is set to 30. I can choose 25 to set my project settings to, but you must remember to set your render settings to 25 frames a second as well. This is just the project, the render settings are different. So you could, for example, I could choose to animate in 30 frames, but I could export at 60 frames so that it gave me a little bit more leeway if I wanted to do any slow-mo stuff. That's why you have the option of being able to do 2 different frame rates. But if you do change it here, you must change it in your render settings if you're expecting it to export at 25 frames, otherwise doolally things happen.
Cool. So back to when you were adjusting the keyframes in your dope sheet, I think this is when this came in. How are you overriding the keyframes just by dragging them?
Yeah, I just control dragged. So if let's adjust this one. So let's go to my position. Okay, let's change this so that it looks different. Or actually, let's go the other way. Let's go, hey, I've accidentally screwed this one up, but I know that this one is correct. So I go back to my dope sheet. This is the keyframe I'm working on at frame 30. I select them. I hold down Control on my keyboard and then click and drag, just like Elly's done with all of the duplication of objects and scenes and things like materials. And then I put it over where I want to drop it and then let go. And now if I look at my F curves, it's there. I can also do it in here, actually, I believe. So I can select that, I can control drag, and I can overwrite it that way as well.
Cool, thanks.
That's all right. I do like this new F curve look. It's much easier to see.
It is very nice, isn't it?
Mm.
Okay, so there's a couple more that are relating to something slightly different, but
Okay.
I'm gonna shout them out anyway. Just we can see. Is it possible to animate squish for a bouncing ball? I like that.
Yes. I suppose you want me to show you how, don't you? there is, funnily enough, in our wonderful land of deformers, there is an appropriately named squash and stretch. So this squash and stretch deformer goes in your sphere, and it's been a while since I've used the squash and stretch deformer, but you can choose where the bottom is, and you can choose the expand boy. So as stuff goes back up, you can make it expand. Oh, it goes a little bit crazy. So you've got a little bit of flex there that you can use to keyframe, and you can just keyframe that factor and the expansion. It's been a while since I've played with it, but it wants to know where the top of the ball is, where the center is, where the bottom is, which thankfully, because of the size of the sphere and the size of this, it's automatically sorted itself out. Aspect doesn't really matter, but I can, you know, do a little bit of tweaking with these sploosh. But that's something that you can adjust with the squash and stretch deformer.
Cool, thanks. There's one more, but it's relating more to kind of dynamics, so I think I might save it
Okay,
a little bit later.
that's fine. In which case, shall we look at dynamics? Or if we're on keyframes, shall I look at aligning to spline and cameras, or do you want to do that?
I'll do that. I'll do that in the.
Okay, that's fine. Yay, let's look at dynamics then. Right, so I'm going to reset my layout to standard, file and new, and let's have a look at some dynamics. So we've just keyframed a bouncy ball, which is all very well and good. What about if we wanted to have a more organic look that doesn't involve me having to keyframe anything? Well, we can do that with dynamics. I'm going to create, funnily enough, a sphere. This will be my bouncy ball again. I'm just going to move it up. Probably going to move it up a lot, so I'm going to need to come out of here. And I'm also going to create a floor object. And I'm going to show you why I create a floor object in a minute. So rather than a plane, I'm creating one of the infinite floor objects, which is this one. Boom. So I now have an infinite floor. Yes, it doesn't look like it's infinite, but it is when you render. But for this example, it doesn't matter. Okay. With my sphere selected, I'm going to go to tags, simulation, and I'm going to add a rigid body tag. What that does is add a tag to my sphere that says, funnily enough, the surface of this sphere has a rigid body. The dynamics then take into account all sorts of other things like collisions, masses, forces, what's going on in the world. Soft body will ignore for the moment, caching we'll come back to. But it means that basically the upshot of which, if I press play, it'll start to fall. It's fallen straight through my floor. The reason for that is the floor is not being told to be dynamic in any way, shape, or form. So we need to add a different type of tag to the floor. I'm going to go to tags, simulation tags, collider body. Funnily enough, because this is what it will collide with. Click my collider body, you can see I've now got these two different tags, and now if I press play, dump, it sort of sits there. It doesn't bounce very well, but we can control that and change that in a bit. The reason why I wanted to create a floor is because I'm going to show you something that's a real neat trick. So I've deleted the two tags. If you select the sphere and the floor, right click on the sphere, simulation, and add a rigid body tag to the sphere, the collider body makes itself. I'm easily pleased, but it means that there's a few less clicks I have to worry about, and it means that I can press play and the sphere sort of gently falls to the ground.
Is this just the trick with the floor?
That's just the trick with the floor. Yeah, it doesn't do it with any other object, I'm afraid. It will, if you have more than one object selected, it will make a rigid body. Only with the floor will it make a collider.
Cool.
But if you just want to set up some dynamics for some fun, it's an easy way of doing it. With our tags, we have some functions. So if I look at my collision factor for my sphere, I've got some interesting information. Most of this I think I can ignore for the moment so that I don't need to go into it in too much detail, but collision is the appropriate one because I've got some bounce and some friction. So my bounce is set to only 5%. So let's set that to 50 and see what it does. Absolutely nothing. That's perfect. Let's try adding that to the floor as well. There we go. You have the ability of tweaking different settings depending on which one of these you have selected. So let's whack that up a bit more on the bounce on the floor. Let's make it 100%. There we go, bouncy ball. It's a little bit flat, isn't it? Let's see if I can lower the friction. There we go. Just looks a bit better. But it's a really quick way of adding more realism and worrying less about having to keyframe this ball doing exactly what you want it to do. Let's select both of those. Let's make it 100% bouncy and 0% friction. Whee! That's better. Let's whack my animation up more than 90 frames. So let's make that 500, just so I can press play and watch it bounce up and down ad infinitum. You may notice that I now can't scrub backwards. And if I keep moving forwards, it keeps animating. This is because a dynamics is a simulation. This means Cinema 4D is calculating it as we go right now. It doesn't understand it as something that can play backwards. I can go to frame 0 and I can go there, but if I go backwards and keep going forwards, it just keeps doing it. It won't reverse until you cache it. So you may have heard the phrase baking when it comes to 3D, and that basically means kind of solidifying simulations or dynamics as keyframes in the background. It basically makes a cache. So let's select my cache, and then I can bake all. And what it will do, Cinema 4D will figure out the dynamics in the background and make a database file that you don't really need to worry about. But it means that I can now scrub through my animation. Oh, I should be able to scrub through my animation. I didn't do it. Ooh, interesting. Let's clear all caches. Let's just bake the sphere instead. There we go. Oh, it's because I had the floor in there as well. I didn't need the floor because the floor didn't do anything. So there we go. We can just add the bouncy ball, but it means that I can scrub through. If I made any changes to this sphere, for example, like its size, and I scrub through, you will see that it intersects with the floor. This is because the keyframes in the background are still cached. They haven't been overwritten by the fact that I've changed my sphere size. So I would need to clear my caches and rebake the object. And now when I did it, you can see it's like a big heavy ball thudding to the ground. So let's try a much smaller ball, rebake. Oops. Let's clear all and bake object. There we go. There we go. And I can scrub through it. And off it goes, bouncing happily all by itself. Okay, that in theory is pretty much the information that you need when you deal with objects like this. The only other thing I can show you is what happens when you have multiple objects, but to be honest, that's what Elly is about to show you anyway. So I'll leave that for Elly to show. Have we got any questions on dynamics?
Nothing really at the moment. So the one that I was referring to, I've sort of semi-replied to it. So Drake was asking, let's say he wants to start with some spheres.
Yep.
Drop them into a container.
Yep.
But the challenging bit, the spheres then kind of merge together, so melt together to create like some kind of blobby liquid without real flow and X particles. And so I sort of suggested sphere, emitter, volume builder, volume mesher with dynamics, but the only downside is the spheres don't remain perfect because they will merge instantly. So I wondered if you had a...
You might be able to get away with a meta ball, but it's been a long time since I've ever played with that. And you may be able to control the meta ball merginess. That's not a real word. But you can control stuff with meta balls and things that way.
Cool. Right, so let's have a look. We've got a couple of questions coming in.
Okay.
Is dynamics working with gravity, and can that be modified if so?
Yes, to both of those. So the forces that it works with are the general forces that exist in a Cinema 4D scene, which actually, if I go to my project settings, Control D, and I have a look at dynamics, I have gravity. I'm going to clear that cache so that it has to be a simulation again. And I'm just going to make that a bit bigger, which means that Cinema 4D will calculate it. So we can see that that bounces up and down. If I go to my dynamics tag, sorry, my dynamics tab of my project settings, I've got some gravity. Let's stick a 5 on that instead, and let's see what difference that makes to my animation. It gives it much more pull. I can also, if I want to, change that to a minus number, and in theory, watch my sphere float away into the land of nowhere. I can also, let's make that 100 instead. And we'll watch it slowly come down as gravity is very, very light. You can also use, under my simulate menu, forces. So let's add a gravity, and let's change its direction. And if I go to the beginning, I can control where gravity is based on my gravity. I can also do other things with dynamics and simulations and objects as well, all with these forces. So I can deflect, I can attract, I can add friction and things.
I was going to quickly say, Jonathan just said, can you make an object magnetic? And so I was going to say you could show the attractor, and that could create a similar effect.
That's it. So if I create an attractor object, I can move this around. Do I need a field? Might be easier with a field, mightn't it? So let's create a spherical field. I probably need to whack the strength up.
Yeah.
Let's turn off gravity as well. Whoops, that might be a bit strong. But yes, you can attract things to it in a sphere of influence. Can I?
I had another quick question, which is a good one actually. Is it possible to add random movement similar to the wiggle expression in AE? And I was thinking of like the vibrate tag. Vibrate tag, is that right? I'm thinking that's probably the most similar to the wiggle, because you could adjust then the rotation, the position, and stuff like that, can't you?
I've never used this tag, like, ever. So off it goes. Oh, where's he go? Where's he off to?
So you might want to. I take the dynamics off. Just so it does.
Yeah, just see if we can do a wiggle. Whee!
Yeah.
And you can, of course, add 3-dimensional wiggliness.
That's probably the most similar thing, I'd say.
Yeah, even to the point of scale. Woo, gone proper trippy. Whee! There's hours of fun here. Okay, there's that one. Anything else?
There's another one, but it's more tech related. So I think it's about
Okay.
getting 19 files into 24. So maybe you could answer in the background. Maybe.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's it for now. That seems to be all the questions that are in. But yeah, let us know if you have any more as we go. We can just answer these out loud.
Phenomenal. Right. Okay. I will throw the screen at you.
Cool. Yeah, let's get into it.
There you go.
Oh, so this was the thing I was trying to make. The
Oh,
spheres
nice.
into a container. However, weird bug. Watch this. Not that I should be advertising this, but right. So I'm going to play it, and it's going to fall through the bottom. Right.
Uh-huh.
And I pause it, and now it's in. Weird,
Ooh,
but hey,
viewport.
we'll
Interesting.
ignore that. So yeah,
Report.
if that's the kind of thing you're after, I mean, I need some perfecting. That's the setup that I did. Yeah, cylinder as my container, collider body, and then sphere in an emitter in a volume builder, and I put an SDF smooth just to get the smooth in. Yeah, saves you using real flow. Okay, cool. Right, let's get into what we're going to be making. So let me just open up this. So I thought it would be fun if we made a total project, like a total animation that we can then, or that you guys can then follow along with and render out, and it'll be something that you can put on like socials or if you wanted to. So let me just give this a play. And so what we have here is just a whole bunch of like dynamic spheres. And we're going to use, okay, so I've cheated a little bit. I'm using a cloner, but a cloner is going to be a very big part of next week's MoGraph session. So I'm not going to go into kind of all the parameters or all the settings because it is a huge, huge tool that you can get so much out of. But I'm just going to I'm going to touch on it a little bit, mainly because it just helps with this scene quite a bit. And we're going to, set up some dynamics. We're going to set up some keyframes, and then we're also going to set up our materials, our lights, in the same way as we did them last week. And then some camera animation as well. We thought we'd do that and get some fun stuff going on. Okay, cool. Also, I apologize now. I have like a really bad sore throat and a cough, and so I'm going to try my hardest not to cough because I know that can be like really annoying, like for people that are listening. But I can't like stealth mute like I have been for the last like 45 minutes. So soz guys. Okay, cool. Right, so let me just move this out of the way. Oh, actually, one other thing. Let me just switch this on so everyone can see my mouse a little bit clearer. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to set up my render settings. So I'm going to make this like a square scene and a square animation. So it's kind of like Instagrammable, if that is a real word. So I'm just going to set it to 1080. So I'm in my render settings and I'm in my my output, and I'm going 1080 by 1080, and I now have this nice square which is going to be rendered. And we're going to come down and look at these settings in a little bit, but we're going to do that once we've kind of finished that animation. And I'm just going to go into physical, and I'm going to add global illumination, but I'm just going to switch it off just so it's like it's there ready for me to switch on. So this is the setup that we have, and now we can get into like making some stuff. Cool. Right, so the first thing we're going to do, we're going to grab a plane, and this is going to be kind of the base of our scene. And I'm just going to adjust my width and height to 1000 by 1000, and I might need to make this a little bit bigger if I can see kind of some of the edges, but we'll see in a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to make our torus, which is going to look a bit like a Krispy Kreme donut. So let me grab a torus, and let me just pull that up, and we're going to make it look a little bit kind of squidgier. So So let me just sort of adjust these. I'm using these little yellow dots just to kind of adjust the size of this torus a little bit. Okay, cool. Right, now I'm going to come into my 4 views and I'm just going to place it on the bottom, because I found when I was using I used a dynamic placement, but it wasn't perfect. So I'm just going to do this by eye. So I'm just going to drop it down, and that's, you know, pretty good. That's pretty spot on for me. Right. So let's have a look at our shading lines. So at the moment, my torus is a little bit, it's not smooth enough yet. And so we need to adjust some of our segments, which is something we did, I think, in week 1, actually. So I'm going to come over to my ring segments, and because I've already done this, I know 128 is a pretty good number for this. And then on my pipe segments, I'm going to do 64, just so we have that nice, smooth rounding. And now we can switch off our lines. We don't need to see that. Okay, cool. Right. So now let's find a cool looking angle. Actually, no, let's not. Let's not. We'll do all that later. We'll do that later. But now we'll just set up our scene and our dynamics. So I'm just going to come in here just so I can kind of see what's going on. Right. So a little trick that we can do. So I'm going to create my dynamic spheres, and they're going to fill up my torus. But the trouble is, at the moment, I can't really see anything inside my torus. So even if I put a sphere in there, I wouldn't be able to see it. And so, you know, we could make our like transparent material and put it on, but there's actually a little trick we can do, so we don't have to do that just yet. If I come into my torus and go into the basic tab, we have this lovely little X-ray option. And if I just check that on, we can actually now see inside of our torus. And so the main thing to remember here is if I render this, it's not going to be like transparent. We still have to make sure we put our transparent material on there later, but it just makes it a little bit easier for us to work at the moment. Okay, cool. Right. So now what we're going to do, we're going to come up to our like primitive shapes, and we're going to grab a sphere. And straight away, this sphere is way too big. So we're going to come into my sphere, into my object tab, and I'm going to set my radius to 8. I'm testing my memory now. 8. And I'm going to come back into, no, I'm not actually. I'm going to set up my cloner first. Okay, so as I said, the cloner is a massive tool inside of MoGraph, and that's going to be like, it's going to be a whole section next week, because there are it is so unbelievably powerful. There's so much you can do with it. But for the purposes of setting up this animation, it just made sense to use it. And so it's like, think of it as like a little teaser, a little preview of the cloner. So we've had a look at basically all of these things here, except these options and these options. And these, you know, are going to be next week's stuff. But these are our MoGraph tools. And so we can also find them up the top here. We have a little MoGraph menu, and it's all just the same stuff. So, you know, we have our MoGraph generators, which are all green, and we have our effectors, which are sort of like a purpley blue. But I like to use this menu up here. And so this is our cloner. So I'm going to grab my cloner. And without going too much into it, the way that this cloner works is it will generate clones. And so what I can do, I can take my sphere, and we have to use our hierarchy system here. And so our sphere has to be a child of our cloner in order for them to work together. And so we need to grab my sphere, and I'm just going to drop it on my cloner so we can see my arrow is pointing down. I'm going to let go. I'm going to try not to cough. And we can see we now have a whole bunch of spheres. And so what's happened is our cloner, which is in grid array mode, and we're not going to worry about the other modes or kind of like what they mean. And we have a count of 3 by 1 by 3. So we can see we have 3 by 1 by 3 for our spheres. Actually, I totally lied. We are going to change the mode. So we want the mode to be linear. And then what we're going to do, inside this position, we're just going to set that to 0 because we don't want any like position anywhere. Oh man. And then my count, I'm going to set to 1. Okay, so now what we have is we only have one sphere. And you're probably thinking, Elly, why are you using the cloner if you're only got one sphere? And it's because I'm going to keyframe my count amount. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to reposition this. So let me move my cloner across, and then I'm going to move it up slightly. And this is where I want it to start. And what I want to do, I'm gonna keyframe my count, and it's gonna create loads of spheres. But before we set up our keyframes for our count, we're gonna set up our dynamics. So on my cloner, I'm gonna right click, and this is where we're gonna set up our rigid body tag. So Matt showed us the rigid body tag and the collider body tag and the settings inside of those. And those are the things we're going to be taking advantage of. So if we grab our rigid body tag, and let's just see, press play, cool, and it falls through the sky. That's great. So we know our rigid body is working on our cloner. Now I need to make my torus a collider. So if I right click on my torus, come back down to simulation tags, we're then going to use a collider body. So now as my sphere interacts with gravity, it's going to fall down and it's going to hit my torus. So it's going to kind of remain inside the torus. So if we press play, cool. So it's doing exactly what we want it to do. So our dynamics are now set up. So now all we need to do is set up the keyframes for the count on our cloner. Because we want a whole load more spheres, right? We don't just want this one. So what we're going to do, so I'm going to make sure I'm on frame 0. That's really important. And on frame 0, I want there to be 0 spheres. I want there to be absolutely none. And so we have this keyframe button, which Matt was telling us about. So as you can see, like as he said, loads of stuff can be keyframed inside of Cinema 4D, like loads and loads of stuff. And so I can set my keyframe, and I know it's done that because first of all, this little button here has gone red, and I've also got my sort of white-ish icon here on frame 0. Cool. Let me just increase my frames to 120. And then on frame 90, so this is where I'm going to set my next keyframe. And I'm going to get a count of, let's do quite a few. Let's do 800, see how it handles it. And so what's happened? So this has now gone yellow. And this is because I have changed the frame that we're on. And I've also changed the value that's inside this parameter. So all I need to do is hit that again, and it's gone red, and I've got my keyframe here. So I've set up my keyframes. Now, if we go back to the start, we're using this little go to start button here. When I press play, hopefully what should happen is a whole load of spheres are going to appear, and up to 800 of them, and they're all going to be dynamic, and they're all going to be inside the torus. Let's press play. Okay, cool. Right, cool. So it's doing what we want it to do. Let's get a little bit closer in here. Right, okay, so that's the first part. Now what we're going to do is, so I ended up, if we go back to here, I ended up with 3 different cloner setups. And that's what we're going to do, just because it adds a bit of like nice variation. And I mean, we could use like effectors and stuff for it, but I want to save that goodness for for next week. So for now, we're just gonna do multiple cloner setups with different size spheres. Okay, cool. Right, so let's go back to the start again. And back into my 4 views so I can reposition this stuff a lot easier. I'm going to grab my cloner. I'm going to hit my command key, and I've still got my command key down. And I'm going to click my cloner. I'm holding my mouse button down, and I'm going to drag. That didn't work. I'm going to drag again. And now I've duplicated my clone system. And so what it's done, it's duplicated absolutely everything, including my keyframes. So I don't have to worry about keyframing this stuff again. And then with my cloner 1, I'm just going to sort of move this over here, because I think it'll be cool that the spheres kind of appear in different places, and then as they kind of fill the torus, they'll merge, and you know they'll dynamically interact with each other. So that should be quite fun to watch. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to adjust the radius. Let's go with a radius of 11. Right. So because these spheres are now a little bit bigger, I'm thinking I don't really want to make 800 of them. So we don't need kind of like 1600 spheres in here at the moment. So let me come into my cloner 1. And if I go to frame 90, really easily, I can just adjust this number. So let me do 450. And this has gone yellow again, because it's telling me that the value has changed. And I'm going to hit that keyframe again. So now what's going to happen is this first cloner is going to be creating 800 of these little 8 centimeter spheres. And this second one is going to be creating 450 of my 11 centimeter spheres. Let's go to the start and let's see what this looks like as we press play. Okay, cool. Right, so it's getting a little bit full because I wanted to add some more in. So let me go back into my cloner and let's change this count to 300. So now the larger ones, there are only going to be 300. And now these slightly smaller ones, let's set this to 600 because I want to make some room for some more. And let's see what this looks like real quick. All right, cool. Yeah, that's looking all right. Right, so that's the second part. So we've set up 2 of our 3 cloners. Now what we're going to do, we're just going to duplicate our cloner one last time using our command click and drag. And I'm just going to make sure on cloner 2, it's then kind of over here. Just there in a couple of different places. And then this sphere, we're going to make 5 centimeters. So we're going to make it nice and small. And then we're going to set this count to 400 and hit a keyframe. Right, let's have a look. So we're getting a nice mix. So, you know, you guys can choose the counts that you think looks the best. You can choose the sizes that you're after. This is just what I kind of I'm gonna leave it with for now. Let me just play that through again, just to have a look. Right, okay. So we've set up the kind of base of our scene. We've set up our dynamics. And now what we're going to do, we're going to set up our camera animation. And so we're going to use we're actually going to use 2 tags. The first of which is going to be called align to spline, and the second one is going to be a target tag. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we want to create a Cinema 4D camera. So we're going to come up into our cameras and we're going to grab just a standard camera. And this is going to then be in our scene. Basically, where our default camera was, it's going to create it in that exact same position. And I can press this little icon here. If I press that icon, it's going to go white. And now I'm going to be looking through this camera. And so it's really handy. But remember, when you're looking through the camera, if you then adjust and move around, you are actually moving the camera itself. So if you want to kind of keep the camera where it is, just remember you can come out and then you can move around your scene normally. Right, okay, so let's look at creating some camera animation and using what we call an align to spline tag. So first of all, let's grab a spline because we need something, we need a spline because that's what we're going to align our camera to by using this tag. So we know up in this icon here is where we can get access to all of our default splines, or we can draw one ourselves. I'm actually just going to use a circle spline just because we get that nice kind of like 360 rotation by using this one. My plane, I'm going to set to XZ. Actually, before I do this, is there any questions before I get into all this?
Yes, there are a few. I was just
Oh, yeah,
waiting for a good sort of point.
Just stop me. You know, I just get carried away.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Does dynamics work better with larger scale objects than it does with smaller scale objects?
I would say better is in, it's not necessarily better, but scale and size does have an impact on dynamics. So if you have like a really large object in your scene, it's going to act as if a normal large object would. So, you know, like if you had like a massive boulder and you dropped it to the floor, it's not going to come bouncing back up because of its like weight and its size, versus if you had a really small thing inside of your scene, it's going to be affected differently by the dynamics. So yeah, size does play a part in dynamics.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, if you are dealing with smaller stuff or larger stuff, you may just need to adjust your settings. You know, in theory, 3D isn't real, so size isn't an actual limiting factor. You just need to be aware of sometimes of collision data and other things which can all be found in the project settings. So Elly, if you just go to Control D for me, please, and then go to Dynamics, you've got things like expert mode, and there you can kind of change where the collision margins are. So if you've got smaller objects, you don't want a collision margin of 1 centimeter. If all of your objects are less than 1 millimeter wide, they're going to not touch each other. I mean, I'm all for social distancing at the moment, but that would be ridiculous. You know, there's things like this that you can tweak, that if you're dealing with smaller stuff, then you can then change the settings. Okay. Another one quickly said, one of my spheres is glitching through the torus. That can happen, can't it? You know, it is one of those things. Sometimes you just need to be a bit careful with the number of things that you make.
Yeah, so
Cameron,
adjust your count.
Yeah, has said some of the spheres are flying outside of the donut, even though they're definitely starting inside. That is because the capacity has been reached. Most likely, isn't it? If you've got too much stuff, the inner axes are overlapping, so they have nothing to do other than just sort of fly apart rapidly. I think we might get to this one in a minute, but this is an interesting example. If the clone spheres were to appear as bumps on the surface of the donut, as in the bumps were to appear like the bumps were growing outside, could this easily be done?
Okay.
I think there is a way of doing it. I'd probably be tempted to do that with some form of point mesh thing, so that it would, and maybe a volume builder. So imagine you had a normal surface, but then all of the bumps raised and then came back down again, like a lumpy surface.
Okay.
There'd be ways of doing it, but it would probably involve the volume builder or point level animation, I would have thought.
Yeah. Would you do it with displacement? Would that not be easier? If we're talking
Sorry?
about we're talking about bumps on a surface, could we not use displacement? Would that not be a bit easier than actually doing it with geometry?
It depends if you want them to appear kind of like, imagine that the surface all of a sudden becomes really, but to be honest, a displacement deformer would do it as well, and the strength of a
Yeah.
displacement deformer. Yeah, that would be a way of doing it.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Oscar has asked, why haven't you baked the object yet? Isn't that needed to continue working on the project before you do anything else?
No, I didn't do any caching on the
You don't
project.
really need to at this point, do you?
No. If it was really heavy or was really slow, I would, but it's not. So I didn't do it with the final project either. And in this one here, I didn't do
Fair
any
enough.
caching in that. I only cache if it's like a really heavy scene and kind of like every time I'm playing it through, it's sort
Laggy.
of like lagging and it can be a bit frustrating. Then I'll cache. But the downside of if I cached now and then wanted to make some changes to my dynamics, I mean it's not the end of the world, but you would just have to delete the cache, make your changes, and then recache. And so yeah, I ended up not doing any caching in this, but only because I didn't need to, luckily.
And that's it for the moment.
Cool. All right, cool. Yeah, well, any other questions, guys? Yeah, just let us know,
Will
and
do.
I'll try. I'll try and stop every so often.
That's all right. I
Just
was just trying to find a break. If not, I was going to go, we can wait till the end. It's fine. But yeah, thank you for that.
yeah, just be like, Ellie, stop talking for a
Ellie.
sec.
Hello. Yeah, it's all right.
Okay, cool. Right, so let's get back to setting up some camera animation and setting up our align to spline. So what we've done, so we've made our camera, which is kind of up here at the moment, and it doesn't matter, its position doesn't matter because we're going to align it to our spline. And our spline is our circle. So I'm just going to sort of pull this up a little bit, and I'll end up adjusting the position of this likely anyway. Right, okay, cool. So how do we get our camera on our circle spline? So we get to take advantage of even more tags inside of Cinema 4D. So I'm going to right click on my camera, and under animation tags, this is where we found our vibrate tag. So, sort of like our wiggle expression. And we have our align to spline. So if I grab that, we can now see we have this align to spline tag on our camera. And inside our tag properties, so in our attributes manager, we have this spline path. And in here is where I'm going to drag and drop my circle spline. And we can see immediately my camera has kind of snapped to my circle spline. And now we can take advantage of these settings here. So we have a position percentage slider. And so if I kind of just move the slider, you can see what exactly is happening. It's kind of adjusting the position of our camera on our circle spline. And we can animate this, and we're going to animate this. But what I'm going to do, first of all, let's just take a little look inside my camera. So it's looking a little bit weird at the moment. We're not really seeing what we'd like to see. And if I adjust the position, it's not really looking at our like the center of our torus. And that's kind of what we want to be focused on. So we can use another tag. We can use a target tag. And I think we looked at them when we did lighting last week. But if not,
Yep.
yeah, we did. I thought so. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to right click. Actually, first of all, I'm going to set up my target. So let me come out of my camera. And I'm going to use a null as a target. And that's just because the null is nice and invisible, and so it's a perfect thing that we can use. And what it's done is it's dropped, the null is now completely in the center. So its position is 0 on the X, Y, and Z. And that's perfect because that's the center of my torus, and that's the center of my scene. So that's what I want to be like the focus point. And so on my camera, I'm going to add another tag. So I'm going to right click, and under animation tags, we have a target tag. And sort of similar to our align to spline, we have this, this box for our target object. And our null is going to be our target. So I'm going to rename it target, just so we know. And I'm going to drag it, I'm going to drop it into my target object. And if you noticed, our camera, the rotation of our camera suddenly just moved. So now if we come into our camera, it's now focused a bit more on our torus. So what we're going to do, we're actually going to grab our circle spline, because it's a little bit too close at the moment. I'm just going to raise it up, just so we can have that in view. Now, back in our aligned spline, when we adjust our position, we can see that it's remaining focused on, like, it's remaining targeting our null that's in the center of our torus. Right. So now we can keyframe our position. So on frame 0, I'm just gonna, on position 0%, I'm gonna hit a keyframe. And then at frame 90, I'm gonna pull this all the way up to, do you want 100%? No, let's do 50%, because we don't want it to be kind of like spinning, otherwise our eyes are gonna hurt. I'm gonna hit a keyframe at that. Now as we play through, we have our camera kind of rotating around our scene. But let's also animate the position of our circle spline, and our camera is going to follow that as well because of our align to spline. So let me, on frame 0, let me pull it a little bit up, so it's a little bit higher. And in my circle coordinates, because I'm just going to be adjusting the position on the Y, this is the only keyframe I need to be setting. So I'm going to hit that there. And then at 120, we're going to pull it down. So it's like a really nice looking like angle. I'm going to hit that keyframe again. And now let's take a look. So we're going to add a bit of like a zoom in as it's kind of rotating. Cool. Right, cool. I think that's looking quite nice. The only thing I don't like, do you know what? I don't like, there are too many of these ones and there are too few of the small ones. So this is a benefit of not caching. I'm just going to sort of adjust these now. So let me just figure out which are which. Right, so I think these are my small ones, aren't they? These are my really small ones. Right, so let's add some more of these. So I'm going to set my count to 550. And then inside of this one, I'm going to set my count to 500. So now let's take a look. So now there should be less of those medium-sized ones and a few more of the bigger ones. Cool. Cool. So yeah, a lot of this takes like tweaking until it's like aesthetically pleasing for you. But for now, I'm gonna leave it at that because I want to get into creating some lights and materials. So you know, we have like our renderable animation at the end of this. Right. So let's create our new view panel, just so we can see what's going on. And I'm going to grab these little 3 lines and I'm going to dock it in here. Right, let's go. Let's take a look in here. And I'm just going to go to Option and R, and this is going to get my render view up. I'm just going to raise it up a little bit. Okay, right. So let's create a little bit of lighting. And so last week we went through how we can light our scene with like a sky and a HDR, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So the first thing we want to do is come into our render settings. So we just hit that little cogwheel here, and we want to switch on our GI. Everything's going to go black, and that's because we have now nothing lighting our scene. So if we grab a sky, this is going to add some lighting, some kind of nice looking lighting to our scene. And then inside our asset browser or a content browser, if you're on anything pre-24, and I'm just going to grab this this sort of like concrete one here. And then it's just downloading quickly, taking a little bit of time. Okay, cool. Right, so that's downloaded. So I'm just going to drop that onto my sky. So now we have, oh, that looks quite nice. So now we have some nice lighting in our scene. Now first of all, let's create this sort of thin glass material so we can see exactly what's going on inside our torus. So we're going to create a new standard material. And this is going to be our glass. I'm just going to rename that glass. And we're going to drag and drop this onto our torus. Right, so let's open this up. Let's take a look at what we've got going on. So straight away, we want to turn off our color channel. And inside our reflectance, we want to remove our default specular. This is like our fake specular. And we're going to add a Beckman. And right down the bottom, we're going to go down to layer Fresnel. So this is similar to the techniques that we were doing last week. And I'm just going to choose dielectric because conductor is metals, dielectric is pretty much everything else. And under preset, I'm going to choose glass as my preset. So I've set up my reflections. Now I need to set up my transparency. And so if I just switch this on, by default, this refraction preset is set to glass and our refraction is 1.517. So I ended up with like quite a low value because I didn't want this kind of this like refraction to be happening, sort of this sort of like slight deformed look. So I'm trying to remember now what I ended up with. I'm going to go with 1.05. See what this looks like. Cool, yeah, so we get a little bit less of that kind of deforming in the refraction because it's a slightly kind of it gives the impression of like a bit of like a thin-walled glass. So thin-walled is something you can do in Redshift, but I haven't found like a way of doing it in Cinema yet, but this seems to work relatively well. So cool, so we have our transparent glass material now on our torus, so we can now see our spheres and we can start to create some materials for those. So again, we're going to create a new standard material, and this is going to be like a rough brass, and this is going to go onto our medium-sized spheres. Cool. So that was our first cloner setup. Right, now if we open this up, we can start to mess with some of these settings in here. And what I might do, I'm just going to sort of move this in slightly so it's not having to worry about kind of rendering this entire area here. Right, again, we're going to switch off our color. And inside our reflectance, we're going to remove our default specular. Right, so because we're creating a metal, this time we're going to use a GGX. So that's kind of, you know, the most common reflectance kind of layer that you'd want when you're creating a metal material. And then again, we're going to come down to our layer Fresnel. And this time, because we're making a metal, we need it to be a conductor. And we're actually just going to steal the gold preset. We're going to make some changes, but we're just going to kind of like steal this one for now. Right, and to create more of like a rough brass, we're going to come into our layer color, and we're just going to sort of add a bit of like orangey gold to this. Maybe a bit more. And then we're just going to up our roughness. Cool. Right, so we have sort of like this rough brass texture going on, and it's looking quite cool. I quite like it. Cool, right, so that's 2 of our textures down. Now we just have 2 more, and then we can look at how we'd kind of maybe add some lights, and then we can look at our render settings. So again, standard material. So you guys can actually double click in this material manager to create a new default standard Cinema 4D material. I can't, the reason I don't do that is because mine creates a default redshift material. Cool, let's go for a gloss white plastic. And we're going to drop this onto our larger spheres. So that's our cloner cloner.1. Right, let's take a look at setting up our plastic. So again, switch off our color and remove our default specular. That's kind of a recurring theme at the moment. And then we're going to add a Beckman. Actually, no, we're not. No, we're not. Scratch that. We're going to add a diffuse first. And then I'm going to add a Beckman. So my layer 1 is my diffuse. And so you could have whatever color you want. If you want to change the color of this, I'm leaving mine white. Just come into here and select the color that you want for that. And then on my layer 2, which is my Beckman, I'm going to come down to my Fresnel and dielectric. And once we select dielectric, we can choose this PET, which creates like a nice plasticky kind of reflectance. So let me just sort of pull this over here so we can kind of see what's going on here. So it's going to take a little bit longer because, you know, it's trying to work out the transparency of these as well. Okay, cool. Right, so let's bring this over here a little bit so we can do these little small ones. Right, so that's done. That's our glossy plastic. And the final material is going to be a black matte plastic kind of material. And that's going to be on our final cloner setup. So you guys don't have to, you know, follow along with these colors. You could make whatever materials you want for your final one. These I just thought looked quite nice together. So I ended up with these ones. Cool, so black matte plastic. So switch off our color, remove our specular, add our diffuse, and we're going to set this up to be, I'm not going to set it up to be 100% black. I'm going to have sort of like just a really dark gray. And then I'm going to add a Beckman. And I'm just going to set this up in a similar way. So dielectric and PET. And I'm going to up my roughness. Let's see what this is looking like. So we might want to go a little bit darker actually on that color. So back on layer 1, because that's my my diffuse color. You make this a little bit darker. Okay, let's have a look. Cool. Yeah, so I'm happy with how those textures are looking. I think they look quite nice straight away. Right, and now what I'm going to do, I'm going to come into my asset browser and I'm just going to basically steal a texture from the asset browser for the plane, which is going to look like an asphalt floor. So if you guys have the content browser, feel free to have a search in your content browser for something similar. If you have 24, yeah, grab this texture because it looks quite nice. So I'm just going to search asphalt, and I quite like this one here. So I'm going to double click it, and because I already have it downloaded, it's there straight away in my material manager. I'm going to close down my asset browser, and I'm just going to drop this onto my plane. Right, so I'm going to back into this view here. I'm going to just sort of hit Option R to get my my render view up, and I'm just going to do it over the asphalt. I don't need to worry about seeing this just yet. Okay, so it's quite a large texture, and so what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to tile it so it looks like a lot smaller on our plane. It's going to look like a little bit nicer. So on my plane, this is where my texture tag or my material tag is for my asphalt texture. And we can actually change our tiling. So if I increase this to something like 5 and 5, we will see we get a nice finer looking asphalt texture because it's actually tiling this texture across my plane, and it worked quite well. Like, you can't really tell that it's tiled. Sometimes you can tell that things are tiled, but this is quite nice. It looks quite seamless, and for this, it works quite nicely, I think. Okay, cool. So let's now close on that view. We don't need to worry about that anymore, and let's just have a little look at what this looks like at the moment. So yeah, I think it's looking quite cool. Yeah, before I get into anything else, is there any questions? Or are there any questions?
Yes.
Oh,
But
ominous.
it's a bit off topic. And I'm just looking at it. It might be something we come back to after we've done that, because it's,
Yeah.
how do you animate to audio?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Love that. Yeah, okay, cool. What I'll do, let me finish this up. And then yeah, I can throw it over to you and go through some stuff like that.
I was going to throw it to you if you want to go for that one.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Do you want to grab an audio track? Do I have an audio track on here?
I
Might.
don't, not where I am. I don't know if you've got, and we'll have a discussion when we get to that bit, because it depends on how, really, doesn't it? I think.
Yeah. Sound effector.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Okay, cool. Right. Right, cool. Let's wrap this up then, because we're pretty much there, to be honest. The only other thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just add a little bit of like extra lighting. So I'm gonna come up to my lights up here. I'm gonna grab an area light, and I'm gonna steal this same target actually. And I'm gonna, so I always use target tags on my lights because it's a nice, lazy way of rotating lights. So I'm gonna right click on my animation tags, and I'm just gonna grab my target tag, and I'm gonna drop in my target. And then if we sort of come out here, I pull this up, this is gonna just add some additional lighting into those darker areas, and it's gonna create some like nicer reflections as well off of our materials. I'm just going to drop that in there, and then I'm just going to duplicate this light. So I'm holding my command key. There we go. And it's just going to face that target tag still because it's duplicated with the tag on. Just going to move these out. Okay, cool. Right, so let's take a little look in here, and let's do my render region. And it might take a little bit of time to do the whole thing, but I might, you know what, I'm going to pull this little slider down to about halfway. And so the quality is not going to be amazing, but it's going to let me still see kind of sort of how my textures are looking and sort of how my lights are looking, without having to do like an entire render. And I might just have to talk for a little bit while it's doing it. So far, we're pretty much to the end of creating this whole scene. So we set up our torus and we set up our dynamics, and then we set up our 3 different cloners, which have our dynamic spheres in, and it's filling up our torus, and they're sort of dynamically like interacting with each other and they're mixing. And then, yeah, then we created our camera and our circle spline, and we use the align to spline, and we've animated and keyframed the position of our camera around our spline, as well as using like the target to kind of to make sure our camera is positioned and facing in the correct rotation. So yeah, so the quality isn't great, and that's because I've not got this render region up to full quality, but it's just a nice way of sort of seeing how everything's working, and how our lights are looking. And I think it looks quite nice, to be fair. I think it looks really nice, considering we're using sort of like Cinema 4D's materials and the physical renderer. And so yeah, then we created our
I quite like the render quality. It kind of feels like a 1970s photo.
Yeah.
It's got that sort of
That's what I was going for.
grainy, kind of blurry, overexposed look. I love it.
I think if the quality thing was up here, I'd be talking for a very long time while I was waiting. But it's just nice to see the preview. Yeah, and then we created our different textures here, as well as sort of grabbing this nice asphalt one, which creates a nice little like background. And we could also have added some depth of field on here. But yeah, I think it's looking quite good. And I think I even did a redshift.
We have a question.
Oh yeah.
If you were to remove the torus with a keyframe, would the spheres move out of it? Do they still have the dynamics? So if the sphere ceased to exist, then
ceased to exist.
Yeah, sorry, if the torus ceased to exist, the spheres would just fall to the floor because there's nothing containing them anymore.
We can get rid of the torus.
You can turn off the render of the spheres of the torus completely if you want to, because you can just hide it from the render. If you turn it off, it will no longer be a containable object. So sometimes you want to have an object that you can hide from both viewport and render. So we don't even need the glass texture here. We've just got the spheres creating the torus shape. But if you were to untick the torus, then it no longer has anything to contain because the shape is no longer being generated, and the spheres will go everywhere.
Yeah. So yeah, if you don't want to worry about your glass texture, then yeah, just sort of use these little, I call them traffic lights, but I'm sure that's not what they're actually called. So yeah, just make sure they're both red. Editor, renderer, and then
another question: can you speed up renders by having a view further away?
Yeah.
I think it will be faster.
Yeah, it would
because
be faster
there is less,
not having to calculate
as many issues with pixels. Yeah, but I don't know how much different it would make. It may just spend longer on a few pixels.
Yeah, because chances are this area here would take a little bit longer, but then everything else would render really, really fast.
Pretty much, yeah.
But then you don't get that nice angle, that nice view.
That's it.
Yeah. Any other questions before I just touch on how we would render this out?
Nope.
Cool. Right. Okay. So our animation is done, and so now let's take a look at how we would actually render this out inside of Cinema 4D. So let's grab our render settings. So we just hit our little cogwheel there, and we have our render settings here. And oh, silly me, my render is set to standard. Let's just set that to physical. And so what we're going to do, so at the beginning, we set up our output. So this was our width and height resolution, which we did 1080 by 1080 because that's, you know, a nice square kind of resolution. Right, so this is a very important section here. So inside here, my frame range is currently set to current frame. So if I render this out now, all I'd be doing is rendering this current frame. And so depending on what my sort of little keyframe icon was on, you'll see that this from and to is changing depending on what I'm on. So it would only render out this one frame, which is sometimes what you might want to do. If you want to preview a frame, just instead of having to render out an entire animation, realize you don't like the lighting, render out whole animation again, I'd recommend just rendering out the one frame. But if we want to eventually render this entire thing out, we want to make sure we set either manual or all frames. And so for me, because I would want to render frames 0 to 120, that is for me all frames. So I'd set that, and we can see we now have our from is frame 0 and our to is frame 120. And so now if I hit render, it's going to render it from frame 0 to frame 120. And so that's a very important thing if you were rendering out an animation. Something else we need to do if we're rendering out an animation. So now I've set this to all frames. Under save, you need to make sure you set a file path. And so for me, I've got my dynamic donut file path saved. And then we need to select our format. So if we drop this down, we can see we have a whole bunch of different formats. And so in week 6, we're going to be going through loads about render settings. So don't worry about any of this stuff at the moment. This is just if you've been following along, or you want to follow along later on and you want to actually render this out yourselves and have your own animation rendered, then this will these are the kind of the settings that you need for that. So there are two sort of like animation formats. So we have our .mov and our .mp4, which you can use, and it will render out an entire kind of animation kind of as an MP4 or as a MOV. However, some people might want to render out a PNG sequence. So that's what I tend to do. If I'm creating an animation, I will render out a PNG sequence, and then I pull that PNG sequence into After Effects, and that's where I do my kind of post stuff. So if that's something you want to do, and so remember that what you'll then get is 120 PNGs if you're doing it that way, as opposed to just one kind of movie like QuickTime file or something.
Which is fine if that's what you want to happen, but sometimes I have been known to forget and accidentally render 1,000 frames to my desktop. So just be wary of that.
Yes. So yeah, so and then it's so once you've set those different bits up, you set up your output, you've got your all frames or your manual frames with the from and to set up, then got your save path, then got your format set up. It's a simple case of hitting render and then just waiting for it to be done.
So the render button that you need to press is the middle render button, which is the render to picture viewer. If you press the first button on the left, you'll simply just render the viewport again. So you need to press the second one, which you can either just click, or you can click and hold, and then you can see the options underneath, one of which is render to picture viewer. And then you'll be able to actually watch Cinema 4D go away and render each and every single one of those frames as it figures out how this looks, how this animation comes together, where the light is bouncing, and so on and so forth. We're not going to press that now because we'll probably be watching it for quite some time, and we only have 11 minutes left.
Yes, but that was so you guys can, if you want to, go and render your own kind of animation dynamic donut torus thing.
Yeah. We have a question, but yeah. I mean, I'm still waiting for a response with exactly what we meant by sound.
That is like a really cool thing that we could do next week.
Actually, yeah, that's true. There you go, Ryan. We're looking at MoGraph and everything last week, and he's literally just said how to import VO, music, SFX, and animating to beats. So that's the sound effector all over then, isn't it? So
yeah, literally we can do an entire scene on that next week, and I'll make sure I have like, because I don't think I have a WAV file here at the moment. I'll need to make sure I have one that we can distribute.
that we can show, that we can use. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jesse has asked, can we see the volume builder again, if there's time? Is that the setup that that Elly made earlier? Is that what you mean?
If it is, that was kind of this.
Jesse says
I don't
yes.
know why it plays weirdly.
No, I don't. That's odd.
I don't understand why it does this. So basically, to people who don't know, this shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be falling through. It should be forming like this in real time. I'm not too sure why it's doing that.
The dynamics tag on the spheres instead, rather than the volume, and then see what it does. And now put it in
Yeah.
So
yeah, basically the way this was set up, just a little preview, was let me just turn those off. So I made a cylinder, made it editable just so I could remove the top of it. And my cylinder has my collider tag on because I need my spheres to collide with it. I then made a sphere, which is 10 centimeters and segment of 16. Let me just switch that on. And then I dropped that inside. So Cinema 4D actually has its own emitter, which can be found under Simulate, Particles, Particle Emitter. And if I switch that on, what it's doing is it's just sort of like firing these out. Okay, so it does this fine. It fills this up fine. And then the emitter we dropped inside a volume builder. And so, yeah, we've got our emitter in here, and let me just turn off our smoothing. And then let me just alt switch that on. And then our volume builder goes inside a mesher, and then basically turns it into like some geometry. As you press play, let's see if this goes through now. Okay, yeah.
That's weird.
That's very weird.
An interesting bug.
To kind of smooth this whole thing out, we have like smoothing options inside of our volume builder. And then yeah, so this was just like a really quick thing I did. I'm sure like with some tweaking and perfecting, I mean, it could look like it's filling up with liquid, but I mean, notoriously Cinema 4D isn't really known for creating liquids, unfortunately. But yes, that was that setup. I can always drop that in the project files if need be.
Kent has asked, what is the tag set as the shape for on the cylinder? It might be an order of operations thing.
It's just static mesh. Let me just move this out of the way.
If you go to the basic tab on that as well. Oh, we haven't got what I was expecting there. Okay. Not sure. Charles has said as well, can you animate the camera around the spline with the position slider with a line to spline? The dot does not turn red while I go to 0 when I try to keyframe it.
Okay, let's have a little look. Let's do it.
You should be able to keyframe it going around.
So we're talking circle spline, and then we're talking camera, and then on our camera we're going to right click and we're going to go align to spline, and then we're going to drag into our align to spline. Oops, let's go into tag. Let's drop our circle, and it's going to immediately snap to it. And then we should be able to keyframe position at 0%, or any percent. You can keyframe it at any point. And then let's go frame 60, and then let's do position 50, and then you should just be able to hit that button again. and then it should. And if we hit tangential, it will actually follow the kind of the rotation of the spline as well.
So if you want it to like a train going around a track, then you can do that with the tangential, so that you can also choose which is the angle that goes on the tangential. By default, it's set to the Z axis. So you can always choose it to be the Y axis or the X axis, and it will start going crazy as well. It'll start going around sideways instead.
Cool. Any other questions? I'm thinking it's about 5:02. Maybe could I wrap it up maybe?
That's it. We can knock off early. I mean,
Well, I guess yeah, really quickly, just I guess I can show a couple of little bits. So yeah, as I said at the beginning, we do record all these sessions, and so we do actually have an unlisted playlist on YouTube, which I've dropped into the chat. I think I also replied to a couple of the guys at the beginning with this link, but if you want that now, let us know. We can quickly ping it to you, or you can always drop us an email at training@maxon.net, and we can kind of send that over to you guys. That's not a problem. And if you're interested in any other of like all the sessions that we've been doing, those are all recorded and they're live on our Maxon training team. So you can check out, we've got a bunch of different playlists with loads of different stuff. Ask the Trainer, our demystifying stuff. So at the moment we're doing Redshift materials every Monday. And so you can kind of check them out on there. And yeah, there's some super handy stuff on there. As well as if you go onto our maxon.net website, and then check out events under news, you can see all the kind of free sessions that we have going on. So we've got our hands-on stuff. We have a second hands-on workshop going on, which is all about particles. And yeah, weeks 5 and 6 is all to do with like Cinema 4D, and the emitter. So the emitter that we kind of just had a look at, that's in week 5. And then in week 6, it's all to do with thinking particles and X particles, if that's something that you use. Yeah, just like a whole load of stuff on there. And then yeah, let's have a little look at what we're doing. Have a look at what we're doing next week. Let me grab my little presentation up. So yeah, as we kind of have been hinting at, next week is all to do with MoGraph. And I mean, it's no secret that it's the week that I am most excited for, because it is so much fun and we're going to make some really cool stuff really quickly and really easily. And you'll kind of go away and be like, okay, cool, I know how to use MoGraph. I'm going to make some really fun stuff now. And we're going to look at the MoGraph workflow. So there's a particular like order of steps that we need to take when creating stuff with MoGraph. But as soon as you know the workflow, it's all the same in MoGraph. So we kind of learn it once and then we'll be repeating it, which is all fine. We're then going to take a look at the cloner. So we had a little look at it today, but we literally like have scratched the surface with the possibilities with the cloner. And so we're going to have a look at the different modes and the different kind of functions and features that we have inside the cloner, as well as things that are called effectors and then fields, which are all stuff inside MoGraph to create some really cool animation things inside of there. And yeah, we're just going to create a whole bunch of different MoGraph setups and look at Voronoi fracturing, where we can basically just break things apart and smash things up, because who wouldn't want to do that, right? And so yeah, either at the end of this week or the start of next week, we'll make sure there's some project files on there, and there'll be week 5 MoGraph. There might even be a couple on there with a couple of different MoGraph setups that we'll then be running through next week. Yeah, so thanks again to everyone for all your questions. Like, as always, that definitely makes it. It's so helpful for us to be able to answer your questions, and for everyone else kind of listening or either watching live or catching up on these later on, to kind of have these questions answered live and asked from you guys. We really appreciate it. And as always, thanks Matt for the way that you explain stuff. Like, the technical information that you give for these tools is priceless, really.
That's right. It's always fun to see what you then do and make all of the cool fun stuff. I know you're itching to do that for next week. So
I cannot wait for next week. I am super excited. I'm going to want to show so much. We're probably going to run over.
4-hour webinar next week? No.
I wouldn't mind. But
Right,
yeah, so
okay.
yeah, thanks again to everyone. Thanks again to everyone watching live and to everyone catching up later on in your relevant time zones. We really appreciate it. And
Right,
yeah,
yeah, thank you
we'll
for all of the
see.
questions. Take care, everybody, and we will see you all next week.
Yes, see you all next week. Bye, everyone.